Hi, Mark Clegg here, and today we're talking about posing the subject and specifically the female. Even though we've done lots of films to do with showing you how to pose the female and like the female as well as the men as well, we thought we'd just actually do a little bit of an instruction video on the kind of getting started with posing, including some of my kind of favorite tips and tricks, especially when I'm kind of training photographers from the beginning. So we're going to be looking at a variety of things, a variety of images, and just so we can kind of explain on the things to do and the things to avoid as well. So let's kick off with a simple the do's and don'ts. We'll cover this again at the end, but you should always be looking to thin the subject's body by turning the body to the side. You want to make sure that the subject's hands are not dominating the shot by kind of coming close to the face most of the time. Always show as much of the neck as possible and avoid the double chins, as you're seeing on me. Avoid from crossing the arms. That's exactly what I'm doing now. But if we're going to be doing crossed arms, we need to actually just kind of give them a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more animation. In other words, under and over or on top of each other. Try and, as far as the posture is concerned, never have a straight or a slouchy subject, because that can look a little bit weird and it looks like they're uninterested as well. Always try and make sure you're changing the subject's angle. That goes kind of to thinning the body again, in fact, the number one. And in the same way, if you can't move the subject for some reason, then obviously change your angle to actually have that same kind of thinning effect. Always, always, always avoid from a torso which is straight onto camera unless it is for a specific reason. Some of those might be fine art or high fashion. But again, with that in mind, by never having a straight on torso, we always guarantee that the body is slightly turned to the side and hence thinned. Pay attention to the arms and how they can make space as well. Often if you've kind of posed and animated the hand right, you'll find that there's a slight little gap between the hip and the elbow, which that little bit of space, or the hip and the arm, will actually increase the actual thinning of the client. If we've got a fuller figure woman, then basically we're using the arms to actually hide that space so we can't see where the body ends and the space starts. When we're looking specifically at a more kind of edgier style of photography, you shouldn't be afraid to create visual lines and angles within the pose. And even with some inexperienced models like teens and so on, you can kind of get them to get a little bit more funky, and actually the more angularity that you create with pointed feet, pointed arms, pointed hands, leaning, shaping, squatting, whatever you're going to do will actually create those angles anyway. And then close to always kind of show off the body rather than hide the body. So it doesn't have to be full figure clothing, but basically big baggy jumpers are going to make your job a lot more difficult. And if a client is wearing oversized clothes, then try and actually use the hands and the arms or even accessories to actually pull it in, to actually start to show off a little bit more of the figure. When we're using hands and fingers, we always want to have a soft touch, so kind of the back of the hand, a touch of the face, not actually leaning on or leaning in or grabbing, and avoiding fist kind of angle at any stage. So avoid the back of the hand, avoid the knuckles, and avoid the front of the hand. So always looking for the outsides of the hands themselves. But the fingers add grace just like a dancer would within a shoot as well. Emphasis is always on to the face, so as far as the hands are concerned, try and keep them away from the face. So it's better to actually kind of touch the neck as it starts to actually take it away. Remember, the hand is the same size as the face, so once it gets near to the face, it's basically going to start to dominate the photograph. Avoid elbows. We've got examples with all these actually going through today anyway, but avoid the elbows specifically if they're more forward than the face, especially when you're doing this kind of posing where they're kind of coming towards you. A, they'll catch the light, and B, they'll look as big as the face will as well, and they'll actually distract away from the face again. Use the surroundings, even the studio, like a dancer would. So actually allow space, allow grace, and allow the subject to move and shape within the scene as well. And then, of course, once we kind of know all the rules, we learn to break all the rules and then just edit really, really hard as far as that as a photographer is concerned. So the first things first, when we're posing the subject, we're always going to start with the feet. So the image here, the first one on the left hand side, you can see basically because the feet are square on, the torso is square on to us, and hence it just looks like more of a mannequin than it does actually a portrait. So if you are having to do 3D images or kind of clothing what it looks like on different kind of models, especially in the digital world where basically a girl is stood there in her basically lingerie, and then the dress is kind of digitally added on through the likes of a specialist green screening online. But when we're a portrait photographer, we want to avoid this. Now this girl has a great figure, great shape, hence she's a model. Not many subjects in real life are going to look like this. They're going to be slightly fuller, but still we can kind of see when we look at the next image where we have started from the feet, so all the weight is on the back foot. Then obviously that front foot to us has a break or a bend in the knee and the ankle, and then obviously that lovely curve comes up and you almost create like an S-curve effect. When we talked about the spacing between the shaping of the hip and the elbow there, you can see exactly what I mean on both of these images, that because there is a space between the waist and the actual elbow, basically you're creating a thinner kind of subject no matter what. But the key thing is we always want to start the posing from the feet itself. That's exactly the same when we're reverting to a sit-in pose. So you can see exactly the same here when we sat her down, just asked her to sit. And again, a model will usually go into some form of naturally animated pose anyway. But as far as a normal subject, like I asked her to sit down as if she was going to watch television, you can see here on the left-hand image, it really is slouchy and there's really no kind of dynamic going on in as far as the shape is concerned. We can see then with the image on the right-hand side, slight turn of the chair. That will allow the body to change position as well. It'll also allow the legs to come across the pose so they're not sticking straight out and things really. So when we start to compare those two images and you start to see the girl's legs in the left-hand image, because they're kind of being pushed against the cushion of the chair, you can see how one looks bigger than the other, the calf is bigger than the other. Whereas in the secondary image, because the angle and the animation, both of the legs are looking slim. So then once we have posed everything from the feet, we can start to actually concentrate on the next most probably destructive and attractive in the same kind of breath. So the hands, yes? And these are kind of good girl images. In other words, where the first bottom left-hand side, in fact, is probably the one I'd encourage you to learn most. It's, in other words, hide the hands. Because once you start to bring the hands visible, you're going to start to actually pay attention to them and try and overwork them as well. So in the top image, the top left hand side, you've got the kind of the yin and the yang effect, where the kind of the hands are going in opposite directions as far as the arms and the curve, and this bend it kind of option comes through. And again, the fingers which are kind of coming onto the left side as we view her, you can see how it's lovely and bent, and kind of it's more of a touch than a grip. The right-hand top image is what we're referring to the L, and the L pose allows kind of the hand to either go around the waist or to support the elbow, or even allow the hand to go onto the neck, into the hair. But the L pose will allow you to actually start to hide and disguise the hands, but start to use the arms as an animation, especially if we need to actually push together the client's boobs just to actually increase them just a little bit more. And then the bottom right-hand image, again, is just the hand on top of each other. Again, just a kind of a simple animation. You can work and work and work hands, but what we're trying to avoid is kind of the subject feeling like they're a failure because we're unable to explain what we want. So the bad girl images in the hands are concerned is the first of all is just the front drop. So you can see here, obviously this is kind of posed up to do it, but I can guarantee you a normal subject is pretty much not knowing what to do with hands or arms. So as far as that is concerned, just by kind of asking her to actually put them behind her back, we would have solved this straight away. The other bad girl image on the right hand side is obviously where you're crossing the arms, and this can be a little bit more of a kind of a confrontation kind of image or a fed up kind of feel, so you want to avoid that. If we're going to use the cross arms, we tend to actually do them on top of each other. So in other words, one hand turned up, the other hand turned down, and then they raise on each other. And at least from there, we're getting that lovely kind of more relaxed kind of animation. Other bad girl images is where the hand is on the face. Remember, the back of the hand, the front of the hand, and the fist or the knuckles are the bad side. We don't want to be seeing those. You can see on the left-hand image we're seeing the kind of the inner part of the hand here, plus the hand going up onto the forehead. Kind of it's almost like, oh dear, I've got a headache. So we want to kind of avoid that. Plus we're overposing the L arm to actually almost take the weight of the actual elbow below, and want to avoid doing that as well. Then the right hand image is not so much to do with the hands, but it's more to do with the elbows. What we want to do is avoid actually having the elbows come in directly at camera, because that's not really good. You also start to see underneath the arm, as far as where the client has forgotten to shave under the arms, or their full hair and things really. And obviously once the hands are on top of the head, what are they going to be doing? So try and always bring some believability to the animation. One of the most popular things that you're going to want to learn and shoot all the time is over the shoulder. So turning the body so it's 2/3 away from camera as far as the back is concerned, and then basically getting the subject to look back towards us. If we're looking at the image on the left hand side, we can see here that we've just got the one bust beginning to actually show through. Specifically, we're in a contrasty dress against the background, so that breast begins to actually stand out more, and just by turning the body away just a little bit more or moving the camera position towards the right more would have hidden that. The good news is, in both of these images, the subject's nose has been confined within the far cheek. So you never want that nose to break the cheek line. If it does, it will instantly exaggerate the actual shape of the nose and increase its size. So whether it's shooting in a basic studio leaning against the wall, or in a home location, or we're shooting in a bedroom set for boudoir, you can get the idea of over the shoulder, how that works. If you've got that problem to do with the showing a little bit too much of the breast, or the client can't look too far across the shoulder, like I can't in fact, I would need to actually rotate that body around more. So in this case, when you've got a figure which is slim anyway, we can kind of accommodate the roll, so the camera can slightly move position, as well as the subject can roll their back more towards the wall. So both of those things will just soften the kind of the stretch of the neck, and it will actually put less creases in the lines of the neck as well. If we've got somebody with a very fatty neck, we want to avoid from doing this shot, or we've got to go in and fix that with the likes of Photoshop, or we shoot a lot higher, so we raise the chin so it'll actually stretch out some of the skin. And then as far as the image on the right hand side, you can see when we start to allow a little bit more dynamic light, a little bit more kind of dynamic overall, the over the shoulder image can be very, very effective without any real work. The L I mentioned already, and it's a go-to pose that you should learn. So in other words, one hand going across the waist, then one hand coming up towards the hairline. What I'd try and encourage you to do is the hand that is coming closest to the light is the one that you want to avoid being there. So in other words, if the light is coming in from the right hand side, like we can see on the right hand image, we're better to actually use the L shape like we're seeing on the top left hand side. But remember, the L can actually be used for the hands going near the hair as well. Just watch those the elbows, of course. The Hipster, again, really good with models, perhaps not as much with kind of a general client. Obviously, if somebody's got a great look in shape, we want to emphasize that. and that can be done by really exaggerating and twisting. So you can see with the bottom image in pink here, basically we can tell the hips and the hands are on the hips. Even without seeing the hands, we can tell what's going on. We've increased the spacing between the actual body and the arm, so that will stop any kind of top of the arms being bingoed, in other words getting flattened and making it bigger. Plus we can also start to change the direction of the pose, so we can drop a shoulder, raise a shoulder, move a hip away more. We can do lots when the hands are actually up on the hips, but remember not to kind of just shoot the whole shoot like this, because it can be felt as over posing. The hipster in the more kind of classic, like you can see here with a simple flow, it can be used in the top right hand side is the kind of the natural way, but remember to turn the torso more like we're seeing on the bottom left. So that's where it kind of all starts to work together. I got to be honest, I don't think this dress is the best one for the hipster, because it's really stretching the actual drop sleeve, and that is supposed to be off. You know, the strappiness of the dress, it is supposed to be off, but you can see this isn't the best dress for it, but she can kind of get away with anything really. The top left image though is where the one hand is being used on the back of the hip, and then the other front hand on the right hand side is allowing to drop onto the front, so we can kind of control that all the way through. And similarly in the bottom right hand side, instead of the Hipster Classic being used, i.e. the top right, we're putting the hands both on the inner of the back and using them in the same way to actually kind of control the shape as well. So again, all of these apply being a hipster. I would say that the up and down, or the one up, one down, one hand up, one hand down, is good for boudoir, but it can look very, very over-faked in a normal portrait. Be very careful if it's not kind of a modelly shoot, how much you use the one up, one down, specifically when you're using hands in towards the hair. I believe that the image on the left hand side really does look just fake in any case, whereas it looks real on the right hand boudoir style of image and things really. So again, these things will look good in some photographs, they're not going to look good in others, but they are a starting point as well. I learned a technique very early on in my career, which is if it bends it, bend it. So in other words, everything from ankle, knee, hip, wrist, finger, every little joint. There are times though that you want to kind of do a drop arm, but even if you do a drop arm, try and have a slight little bend in the elbow anyway, because that will allow just a little bit more flow to the overall session, and will, even with the fine art image like we're seeing here, it can add that little bit more kind of dynamic. So remember, if possible with the female, always turn the body away from the light source a little to slim the subject. Then you actually turn the head back towards the light source, and then every part or every limb should then actually have a slight little bend in it. So the elbow, the wrist, the fingers, the hip, the knee, the ankle, and obviously a little bit of the toes and so on, but not forgetting the kind of the neckline and the head as well. When we're posing the subject and we're using specifically hands within the hair, it can look a little bit kind of weird and overdone. I think in modelly stuff it works great, but be careful overdoing it. I think all three of these images work, but they only just work. I think the top image, left hand side, this works because obviously it's kind of coming together as far as the hands, the hair, the jumper is actually hiding all the arms with it and things really, and it's quite a seductive and a modelly kind of look with the ring flash. The bottom left hand image where we've got the hands on the top, the elbows are being kind of sprayed out, but because we've got this feather collar, it is kind of disguising a lot of the distraction that you would see underneath the arm that we're creating here. And as far as the right hand image with this very stylized with the stocking over the top, I absolutely love it, and it kind of works all together. But if the stocking wasn't there, I don't think it would look as kind of dynamic, because the hands would start to really dominate. So remember, as a rule, I'll always try and not use a hand near the face, but I fully understand in your session flow that you might want to actually include it there at some stage. Just minimize it. Balance is key as well as the movement within the shoot. So if we're kind of trying to bring a little bit more animation into it, a bit more like a dancey image and so on, then I would try and actually, start off with a walk or a swish, or a kind of a twist in before I'm kind of going to go to a jump in or kind of something a little bit more animated. Jump in the likes of are good as far as, kind of a sports images and so on, but I try and treat the subject more like a dancer or a ballerina than I would actually go into the kind of the over posing element. Saying that, you can see here to do with the boudoir image in the bottom left hand side, here everything has got to be controlled and kind of monitored and looked at and so on to really kind of ensure that we're maximizing the kind of the bend it and the balance within the portrait itself. So we kind of covered all these before, so remember, thinning the body, watching the hands don't dominate, always show the neck as much as you can and avoid the double chins. Avoid from crossing the arms unless you're animated them. Posture, try and get a straighter posture or not a slouch posture anyway. Change the subject's angle, and if you can't do it, change the camera angle. Turn the torso all the time, which will obviously always increase that thinning, but so you've never got a straight on. Pay attention to the arms and the space that they're creating as well as the angularity they're creating. Those visual lines and angles within the photograph can be dynamic, especially when you start to use balance as a part of the kind of the composition of the pose. Clothes should always actually show off the figure rather than hide the figure, and even somebody who's a very, very fuller figure, you don't want to use very, very baggy clothes because that will make the figure even fuller again. Remember, the softer and the gentle touch is key, and then the emphasis should always be on the face, and kind of the key thing is try and look like it's touching without physically touching itself. Avoid the elbows, use the surrounding areas and the studio kind of props and walls like a dancer would, and then remember at the end, forget everything I've said and shoot whatever you want, but then actually go into the real hard edit to make sure you're getting some great photographs. Hope you've enjoyed this quick film. See you on the next one. Bye bye.